This happened maybe a year ago now, and it happened to kind of my entire family. I was 20 at the time, my sister 17. So one night we were all asleep and my sister was on some serious medication because she had trouble sleeping due to night terrors. It was storming out, and it doesn't usually here, so I was up with all the noises and thunder pacing my room. My home is 2 stories, and my sister got the only room on the first floor because she wanted the bigger room with the French doors. There's 2 sets, one in her room and one in the living room, that led to the back. Anyways, it's storming and the wind is really strong, and I'm already on edge. All of a sudden there is a big thump from downstairs, like someone threw open the back doors and the house alarm starts screaming. So my first reaction is to, of course, jump in my bed. And right as I do, I hear my dad, a former Marine, jump out of bed, grab the pistol he and my mom keep under the mattress, heard my mother ask what was the matter, and hear him throw open his door. Let me explain the layout really quick. When you come up the staircase of my house, there's the bathroom. Right across from there, in the small hallway, goes in a sort of L shape from there. At the beginning of the L is the bathroom, the corner is my brother's room, then my room, and at the top of the L is my parents' room. My father stares in my room, in his t-shirt and boxers. He military raid style kicks in my door, clears the room, tosses me the extra 9mm he keeps in his closet, and says to follow him. So he kicks open my brother's room and the bathroom and clears those rooms, takes the stairs at least 3 at a time down to the first floor, and whistles so I know I can come down. At this point now everything my dad's prepared us for safety-wise is kicking in with adrenaline, and it's hilarious to think about this part because I'm in an oversized t-shirt and panties, my dad's in his t-shirt and boxers with socks on, and he's clearing out the house, all this happening within 2.5 minutes, I'd say. So he kicks open my sister's room where we see the back doors of her room are wide open and rain is pouring in. She very groggily sits up and asks us if her soup is ready. My dad stays with her, and I clear the kitchen and the living room, which is one open space, and the living room windows are bay style and face my backyard, and disarm the alarm when I hear my dad shouting, his pistol fire, and a voice that is very much not his say, "Shit." And I see a tall flash of dark run across the backyard and throw itself over the back fence. I immediately call the police and they're there within minutes. Apparently when I left the room to clear the living room, my dad walked from the door to the foot of my sister's bed. She has a big wood frame that you can't really see the other side unless you're standing where he was. And at that point my dad saw the man lying flat on the floor of my sister's room, trying not to be seen by us. He left behind a large kitchen knife and a rolled up string of rope. They never found the guy who broke in, and we reinforced the back doors and changed the locks since they were from the original owner when we moved in, which we should have done in the first place. It was very scary, but now we look back and we laugh because my sister was so out of it. The guy ran off and my dad ran after him across the backyard. By the time I got to my sister's room to check on her, she just looked at me, obviously still not awake, said everything's fine, and tried to go back to sleep. All this happened over a couple years in high school. I'm now 27 and completely over it, but at the time it was terrifying. My family and I tell this story all the time as just a funny thing that happened to us, although at the time it was anything but funny. The lady who lived next door to us moved out, and an older, I would say mid-40s couple moved in. Everything was pretty normal at first. We lived in a small town in Canada, so we would exchange pleasantries with them if we saw them outside, chat about the weather, that kind of thing. One day in the summer, she came to our door and asked if we would mind paying half for a fence she wanted to put up between our yards. My dad said it was no problem, but if we went through my uncle, it would be super cheap. He's an accountant and insanely frugal. She got huffy and didn't want to go through him. My dad said that that was fair enough, but he was going to get his own quote, not from my uncle, but from another company, and would pay half of that, She didn't like that at all, and she stormed off. Things started slowly getting worse. So slow I hardly noticed it happening. Little things. Like in the summertime when my bedroom window was open, I could hear her in her backyard yelling. She would yell at her boyfriend, at my dad or mom. Honestly, sometimes I think she was just yelling to herself. She would have these crazy mood swings where she would one day flip us off as she was getting out of her car, and the next day she would run up to my dad being super nice and ask him about her car or our insurance or whatever. We started just assuming that maybe she was bipolar. She was very entertaining for a while. As I said, she would get into screaming matches with her boyfriend, and the cops would be called. My whole family would watch from our front window. She was clearly drunk a lot. She would drink all day, and then call the police or the fire department or an ambulance or something, because for the years she lived beside us, there were flashing lights outside of her house quite a bit. My mom and I had a membership to a small gym at the time, and one day she showed up. She acted like she was so glad to see us, big smile and wave, and ran right over to us. We could smell the booze on her, and she kept touching me and telling my mother how beautiful I was. It creeped my mom and me out. We went and talked to one of the girls there, but before we even brought neighbor lady up, she asked us about her and said that she thought she might be drunk. We confirmed her suspicions and told her that neighbor lady was drunk a lot. The issue is that she had driven to the gym, so the lady that worked there called the police when she left and gave them her vehicle's make, model, and license plate number. I honestly don't know what happened with that, but she did get her license taken away eventually, and it could have been from that incident, but more likely it was from a different one. I don't remember 100% of what happened, but one night my dad was out shoveling snow and saw a crazy lady pull into her driveway with extensive damage on her car. She bolted into the garage and stumbled into her house. A little while later, we see cop cars out front and them escorting her out of the house. After that, she would tell my dad, unprompted, that her car was in the shop or someone was borrowing it, but we could see it in her garage whenever she opened it. Now, I know none of this has been particularly creepy, but it was in the summer that everything escalated. One morning I woke up to the usual screaming in the backyard, but it was my mom screaming at crazy lady to leave us the fuck alone and not to talk to us anymore. I asked my mom what prompted this, and she said crazy lady was yelling at my dad about our dog peeing on her lawn, and my mom just lost it. The next day, all of the heads of my mother's flowers were cut off. That's when my parents sat my sister and me down and explicitly told us that we were not to speak or go near her no matter what. Unfortunately, not getting a response from us pissed her off even more. One morning, my mom went out to her car to go to work, and she found a picture of my family, no idea where she got that, under her windshield with our faces scratched out so hard that it had torn the paper. It was horrible to fear going outside at your own home. To be scared of being accosted by a grown lady when you are 15 or 16, no one should feel scared at their house. That summer, my dog died. She was 13 but in perfect health, albeit a little overweight. She was acting funny one day, so my dad took her to the vet. They couldn't find anything at all wrong with her, but said they would keep her overnight for observation. That night I got a horrible feeling, and I begged my mother to let me go see Indy, Indiana Jones, our heroic dog. She said that the pet's office was closed and we could go see her in the morning. In the morning, we got a call that Indy had passed away through the night. My family got that dog when I was 2, and I am still tearing up about her death now. I loved her so much. That's why when my family started to find these weird, circular, chalky things on our lawn, I freaked out. I was convinced, and I still am, that crazy lady poisoned Indy. She hated our dog and would bitch about her all the time, and we only found these little discs for about a week following Indy's death. My family was unconvinced, though. I think my dad believed me. He just didn't want to say anything. Think what you will about this, but I still firmly believe that she killed my dog. Things went on like this for another year. Her yelling things at us, throwing trash on our lawn, flipping us off, fire trucks and ambulances to our house. Then, the glorious day came that we saw a for sale sign on our front lawn. I think our whole family slept a little better that night. She wasn't around much while her house was being shown, and luckily it sold fast. My final story about her is from the last week she lived there. I had just come home from school and gone into the house. The weather was nice, so when it was like that I would leave our front door open and only close the screen door. I'll call it a screen door since it's mostly glass with an adjustable screen. But I locked that door, and I didn't have the screen down too low. I was sitting in the living room relaxing when I saw a crazy lady cross onto our lawn and barge up the stairs. I slid onto the ground and crawled into the kitchen hoping that she would just go away. She started to knock on the door and there was no way I was answering. I was all alone in the house and she knew I was home because the door was wide open and she kept screaming, "Open the damn door! I know you're there! Come on!" Crouching in the kitchen, clutching my cordless phone, unsure of if I should be calling the police or my dad. She started rattling the door handle and banging on the door, demanding to be let in. I kept an eye on the back door just in case she had come around, because if she did, she would be able to see me. My hands were shaking so bad that I had trouble dialing my dad's work number. I told him what was going on through sobs and he came home. By the time he got there, she was gone. I guess she had given up, but I was still crouched on the kitchen floor, shaking and crying. After that, she moved away, and we never heard from her again. The people who moved in are super nice and not crazy at all. I forgot to mention that at one point she started working at the grocery store I worked at in the same department, but acted like she didn't even know me at first. Then when we were both outside at home, she would ask me if I needed a ride and that she could take me whenever. My mom made me talk to management and get transferred. I also told them about her alcohol issues, and she stopped showing up eventually. This took place back in the 90s, so no one had a cell phone, nor could we just look up police reports on the internet to see if the area we were going to was safe. At the time I was 14 and my parents had me in the Scouts that were a part of my parents' church group. Now people that know me would probably find this laughable because I do not come across as someone who would have been in the Scouts. To be honest, I wasn't a very good one. I wasn't in it for merit badges or rank, but I loved camping, and that's what came along with it. One camping weekend came up and we gathered together in a parking lot. There were 8 scouts, counting myself, and 3 adults that were going. I knew 2 of the adults and the other one was a new guy that was an Eagle Scout. All 3 were in the military at the time, though I couldn't tell what branch. Only one other guy was my age and I didn't know him very well, and I can't remember his name all these years later. All the other kids were a few years younger than us, 10 or 11 years old, and we didn't want to hang around them. So the other guy and I started talking while avoiding the others. Turned out this kid was a real piece of shit, but I was stuck with either him or a group of pre-adolescents. We pack into a few vehicles and get to the campsite at a park. The park we were staying was just off a back road highway, and at the entrance of the park there was a group of newspaper vending machines, a drink snack machine, and a couple of payphones. A couple of the fat kids started bouncing in their seats at the sight of the drink and snack machines. "I don't want to catch any of you near one of those," said one of the adults. I sat back and enjoyed the whining that ensued. I was a broke kid anyway, so I didn't care. We ended up parking a little ways down the road, not far from the park entrance, and walked up to the campsite. From where we were, we could still see the cars, but not the park entrance. We unpacked and gathered our tents together. There was a large 8-man tent where most of us were to sleep, and a few smaller tents that a couple of the younger kids wanted to sleep in. After we put up the tents, the other kid my age and I began exploring. We started to hike a few of the trails, but they were overgrown. It seemed that they were rarely used and hadn't been cleared in a long time. Eventually we turned back, and we were glad we did, because when we got back, it was time to start a campfire. Now, I'm a little arsonist at heart. No, I'm not going to burn down houses or cars, But when someone says campfire, look out. I was tearing through the woods looking for anything burnable. Twigs, fallen branches, small logs, absolutely anything. I had brought back a big pile of stuff before one of the adults looked at me and said, "That's more than enough. There's no way we'll use all of that." My dreams for a large fire were busted. One of the adults said he had to go home for a while and would be back later that night. We waved goodbye as he left. We carried on as it grew darker, told stories around the fire while cooking our various food goods. Eventually it grew late and we were all getting tired. We let the campfire die and buried it under a bunch of dirt. Then we all went to the tents and fell asleep in our sleeping bags. Clang. I heard it in my sleep. Clang, clang. Something metal was being beaten on. Clang, clang, clang. I was awake, but sleep refused to let me go. A collection of groans let me know that I wasn't the only one that heard it. Clang, clang, clang. It continued non-stop as I rolled over and tried to bury my head in the sleeping bag. I just wanted to go back to sleep. I don't know how long I laid there, but the banging kept going. Eventually I got up and stuck my head out of the tent. There wasn't anything but darkness. I could tell that the sound was coming from the park entrance, though. I nudged the adult I had just met that day and asked him what was going on, and him being the adult, what he was going to do about it. "It's just the park rangers working on something. Go back to sleep," he told me before rolling away from me. I tried nudging him a few more times, but all he did was grunt and call me a little annoying shit. I decided if I wasn't going to be able to sleep, I might as well enjoy myself. So I walked over to where the campfire was and started digging. I found myself in luck and there was still some hot embers left. I used them to start a new fire. Actually, a much bigger fire. How big? That pile of wood that was told to me was too much? Well, I threw all of it on it when I got the fire started. Meanwhile, the banging had kept going. Clang, clang, clang. After a while, nature began calling, and I had to find a bush to pee on. I walked away for a few minutes, relieved myself, and turned around and started to walk back to the fire. Then I realized that the banging had stopped. I was kind of relieved that I could go back to sleep, but now I had this big fire that I started. I then noticed someone with a flashlight down at the cars. At first I thought it was the other adult that said he'd be back later that night. But how come I didn't hear his car driving up or see his lights? I watched for a little bit and realized this person was looking into the cars with their flashlight. I then heard rustling to the left of me. I was just far enough out of the campfire light that I hoped no one could see me. I pulled out my folding knife and squatted down. Somehow that knife didn't help calm me when someone came out of the woods and towards the fire. I figured this person had circled around our campsite through the woods from where our cars were. He began walking around the fire, looking out. He began shining his flashlight around while avoiding to shine directly on the tents. My heart was in my throat as his light beam flashed over me a couple of times as I squatted there behind some tall grass and bushes. After a while, he left the same way he walked in. I waited for what seemed like a long time, until I heard the banging again. Clang, clang, clang. I stood up slow. Someone was still standing in the road but further down and away from the vehicles. Clang, clang, clang. I kept going. I stood there watching the guy down the road. I wanted to run to the tents and wake someone up, but I was afraid that there might be someone watching and waiting. After a while, the banging stopped again. The guy further down the road began walking back up towards the cars. I crouched back down in my spot in time when two guys came out of the woods to my left and into the now dying firelight. They began walking towards the tents. I could feel myself wanting to scream for everyone to wake up, but it wasn't escaping my throat. Suddenly they stopped, turned, and walked away. The banging started again. The guy with the flashlight moved back down the road. I still didn't know if there was someone waiting and watching. All I knew is if the banging continued, that they weren't coming up to the campsite. Eventually the banging stopped. I heard rustling to my left again, but it sounded like someone was moving away. I stood up and I could no longer see the guy down the road with a flashlight. I stood there and waited. Summoning up my courage, I ran to the tents and violently shook an adult awake. Unfortunately, it was the same new adult that I had met the day before. I began to try and tell him what had happened, about the people. I was told that I was being annoying and must have dreamt it. I was mortified. I left and sulked while keeping a lookout. Dawn came and everyone got up. I tried talking to the other adults, but the new adult would cut me off and began to chastise me for making up stories and lying. I was too exhausted to keep fighting with him. A few hours later, the other adults who had left came back. He began asking if we heard anything last night. The new adult said yes, he heard the park rangers doing some work last night. Well, it wasn't the park rangers. All the vending machines and payphones were broken into. A cop came to talk to us and took our statements. He nonchalantly told us, "Yeah, been some people robbing the machines after the bars let out. Y'all are lucky. Been several campers that have been attacked and robbed too." We never went camping in that area again. So this just happened today. Against my better judgment at the beginning of the month, I got Tinder. I matched with a few guys, etc. One of them's name is James. We ended up texting each other and he seemed pretty chill and pretty into me. He's a decent looking guy and we seemed to click. He'd apparently been in a relatively abusive relationship with a woman and he was looking to start over. According to him, she had hit him with a frying pan and pepper sprayed him once. He kept going on about how crazy she was. All right, I thought, it happens. We went out to the movies this past Friday and I had a great time. We ended up talking for a few hours and we hit it off pretty well. I asked about the ex because I was a bit curious as to why he'd stay with someone like that. He didn't say anything positive about her, just that she was crazy, had mental illnesses and didn't take her meds. That kind of stuff. She had tried to baby trap him, but she had a miscarriage. He expressed relief that she didn't end up with the kid. He said that he had felt obligated to her either way. And again, I get that. All in all, I had a good time. This morning rolls around and he tells me that he had hooked up with his ex last night and that he was going to try to work things out with her. Mildly insulting that I'd lost out to an abusive chick, but whatever. I tell him it's cool. He then, a few hours later, texted me to say that she was crazy and thought that she was changing, but she wasn't. Blah, 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 I thought. He kept asking me if he could see me. He was being very pushy about wanting to see me today. He'd begged for 5 minutes of my time so he could explain to me what had happened. I politely told him I didn't want to be involved with someone who was so clearly hung up on his ex. And this is where it got nuts. He admitted he still was, but that he wanted to see me today so I could meet her and she could determine if I was better for him than she was, and that she wanted him to be happy because he and I had a connection. I flipped after that. Told him that the fact he needed his ex to determine who was right for him was absolutely nuts, and that this is not what love is, and that I wanted no part of it. His ex started texting me after that, and it was nonstop insults and incoherent shit that made no sense. She also dropped the bomb that she was his wife. I told her to fuck off basically and blocked the number. I went on Tinder to message him where I called him a piece of shit, and if he was intelligent, he should leave her and never message me again. He started to harass me, saying that I was miserable because they have a beautiful love together and all this crazy shit. He then went on to say, "My wife knows where you work. I hope she doesn't do anything rash." And I told him that that was a threat and I would gladly go to the police. He then said that she'd been to jail before, she's not afraid, and that she loves him so much she'd fuck anyone up and risk jail for him, and that she'd kill my friends if they tried to protect me, and that she's armed and dangerous. I told him goodbye, reported him, and deleted my Tinder account. I did go to the police tonight, but since it wasn't a direct threat, they can't do much. The cop thinks that James was more or less full of shit and just trying to scare me, since some people love getting off on that shit. He said I did the right thing by blocking and reporting him, and said I should just keep my eyes open and alert the people at my job. Scary thing is, James seemed perfectly normal, but he lied about being married, how he felt towards his wife, and he flipped like a switch. His excuse for not being upfront about being married was that they were going to get a divorce. He seemed so docile and unassuming, and the hatred and aggressive attitude was insane. I have to honestly wonder what would have happened had I gone to talk for 5 minutes. I'm kind of concerned that they do know where I work, but if either of them try anything, then the cops can actually nail them. Wow, what a weekend. So this guy has done a crazy good job of hiding this from the people in my town, but finally word is spreading. I don't know if you guys have heard of the band Get Scared, but this involves the vocalist Joel Favier. Joel was born in Lakeland, Florida and has always been a celebrity here. A few months ago I matched with him on Tinder and thought it'd be cool to talk about music and stuff. He was extremely persistent after that and always wanted me to come to his studio. Nothing creepy, but I just got a weird vibe from him, so I always declined. Today, my best friend calls me and tells me that Joel's been arrested for over 100 counts of child pornography and coercing a child to perform sexual acts. Most of the child porn they found was of infants and toddlers being sexually abused. He paid bail and is currently posting on Twitter like it never happened. It's disgusting, and I hope he rots in prison. I grew up on an island in Alaska, and I lived on the same property since birth to high school graduation. Our house was 2 stories, and the downstairs had a bathroom, furnace room, storage room, entryway, and rec room. One of the walls had some plywood pieces up so we could feed extension cords through it to our crawl space. We had a C-shaped driveway that you could enter from one side, then park in the carport, and then just drive forward to exit. The crawl space consisted of 2 big water tanks because we caught our own rainwater, and we would also use this area for storage. The space was 10 by 15, but only 3 feet high. You had to lift a cover up to get into the water tanks. You could only enter the crawl space from the side of the house. It was a 2x2 door that we kept a master lock on but never actually locked it. Our dog Brewster's area was on the side of the house as well. He had a big fenced area, his own stairway and porch which was half covered, and he had a doghouse. Brewster was a Weimaraner chocolate lab mix who weighed 130 pounds. He was a fantastic dog who only barked when necessary. During the summer, we had black bears in our yard most nights, and Brewster would give a quick bark to get them on their way. We knew his barks. There are 4 of us in my family, my parents, myself, and my older brother who is 2 years older and has Down syndrome. My brother was in special education at school, and there were other kids who would come into the same room, but just once in a while throughout the day because they had a similar disability, and were able to keep up in some of the general classes, but some of the kids had discipline problems or mental illness. My brother was loved by the kids in school, and everyone knew him. One day, a native kid that was about 15 came to our door and wanted to play with Travis. We thought it was odd because Travis has moderate Downs, and he didn't really like playing with the other kids. He liked watching kids play, though. Travis likes watching movies and listening to music, usually by himself. My mom asked the kid what his name was, and he said his name was Mark, and he knew Travis from junior high the year prior because he could go into Travis's class sometimes for help with his schoolwork. I remember him staring at me a little too much, and he didn't seem like someone who was mentally challenged. My mom let him come in, but kept a watchful eye on him. Travis seemed like he didn't want him there. My mom told Mark we were having dinner soon and told him it was time for him to go. My mom found out he had moved into the area where we lived but it was still a little ways away. He had been in and out of foster care most of his life. His parents were abusive addicts, from what we heard. I think he came over another time, and my mom felt bad for him, but she felt something was off. She felt like he was coming over because of me. My mom politely told him that Travis didn't really like having visitors, and he seemed okay with that and never came over again. My parents went to a church service on Wednesday evenings and would be gone a couple of hours. I would stay home with Travis. At the time I was 11 and he was 13. I started helping out in the church nursery when I was 9, and when I turned 11, my best friends and I took a babysitting course which included CPR and first aid. We would babysit together and at age 12, started babysitting on our own. My mom was a homemaker and was always home except for Wednesday church service. My parents didn't drink, do drugs, or smoke. I can only remember my parents going out a few times where we actually needed a babysitter. I would leave the downstairs doors unlocked for my parents when they were only going to be gone a couple of hours. I was expecting them home in a half hour and was surprised when I heard the downstairs door open and thought I must have not heard the car pull up, and Travis was up past his bedtime, so I quietly tell Travis to go to his bedroom and get into bed. I start walking through the kitchen to the top of the stairs and I call out, "Mom? Dad?" And I hear the footsteps stop, and I'm looking down the stairs and I can see men's work boots and jeans. This isn't my parents, I thought. The way the stairs were set up, you could only see the bottom half of someone without descending the stairs. I am scared to death, and I run to Travis, who was going down the hall, and I grab him and drag him to my parents' bedroom because it's the only room that locks, has a phone, and rifles. Downs kids are very stubborn, so my brother just wants to go to his room, but I get him to sit down on the bed. I am trying to keep him in the room while I am grabbing a gun and trying to call my neighbor. I can hear him walking around downstairs still. My neighbor answers her phone immediately and I whisper, "Someone's in my house." I'm scared. She told me to come out onto the front porch and she'd be there. I get the courage and run to the door and get outside. Thankfully, she's in our driveway and has her hound dog with her. She lets me know that she is going to enter the house through the downstairs. She disappears from sight but comes back quickly and tells me that the door is locked, so she makes her way up the stairs. She gets to the top when we hear the downstairs door open and the crunching of gravel as the intruder is running off. She lets go of her dog's leash and the dog chased the person into the woods. The dog came back 10 minutes later and our neighbor sat with us until my parents got home. The police were never called because I think my parents assumed it was just a neighbor boy screwing with me. We lived in a safe place where the only thing you had to really worry about was bears and the occasional wolf. A week after this incident, our dog would bark 15 minutes after we went to bed, every night. We would look out the windows and never saw anything. We figured it was bears because it was springtime and Brewster was probably just getting used to them again. A couple of months, the barking still happened. I had my best friend stay the night and we would always stay in the downstairs so we could be louder and stay up as late as we'd like. Kate had a brother that was 7 years older, and we asked if he would bring us some booze. I know we were young, but that was the normal thing for our town. Kids started drinking, smoking, and having sex in middle school because of boredom, I think. We got 13 feet of rain a year, so we would be inside a lot. It was a little after midnight and her brother never showed up, and Brewster never barked that night either. We were sitting on the stairs braiding each other's hair, and we both got a feeling like someone was looking at us, and we looked over, and the guy was staring into the window. We ran up the stairs in a panic. We thought maybe it was her older brother, but he wouldn't have came to the window and spied on us, and the face seemed too dark to be his. But we had the lights on in the downstairs and there were no lights on by that window outside, so it was hard to tell who it was. We didn't wake my parents just in case it was her brother. We waited 30 minutes and went back down to grab our stuff and went to sleep in my bedroom for the night. The next day we talked to her brother, and it wasn't him. That night Brewster was back to barking again. 2 more months go by and I had gone to bed and heard Brewster bark, and I looked out my window and as usual didn't see anything. I had just dozed back off and I woke up to Brewster barking frantically. I look out my window and I see a guy running out of our driveway. I thought about waking my parents, but we had a trail on the side of our house that kids used to get to the road behind us. The neighborhood was on the side of a mountain, so all the kids used trails to go straight through to another road instead of using the main roads. I had never seen someone come out of that part of the driveway because the trail was on the south side of the house along with the crawl space and Brewster's area. My room was the only room on the north side. I decided to go back to sleep and I was tossing and turning. 15 minutes go by and I smell smoke. I go to the hall and the smell is a lot stronger and it's starting to get hazy in Travis's room, which was directly across from mine. I scream, "Fire! Fire! Wake up!" My parents are up and Travis doesn't want to get out of bed. But thank God for the strength of adrenaline. We get outside and flames are pouring out of the crawl space. We get Brewster out of his enclosure and the neighbors all come out to help us. The firemen were there rather quickly, but the fire had destroyed the crawl space and my parents' and Travis's bedrooms because they were directly over the crawl space. The firemen got the fire out thankfully, and nobody was physically hurt. This was one of the scariest nights in my life though. I will always remember the fire chief kneeling down to speak to me after he had talked to my parents, and he said, "Melinda, we believe it was arson." I looked at him with tears streaming down my face, and I say in anger, "Who is arson?" Everyone started laughing so hard, and I am thinking, how is this funny? The damn arson could have killed my family. So he explained what arson was. I am still friends with the old fire chief's son, and I share that story with him often because his father passed away from cancer when we were teens. His father is the only happy memory I have from that horrific night. The island I grew up on had a city and a village out south. We lived out south, but just before the village. We had firemen for out south, north, and the city. We had state troopers for the island and city cops in the city limits. My mom took my brother and I to our family friend's house, and my dad dealt with the fire officials and a state trooper showed up later. After the investigation, my family, neighbors, and firemen pieced together that a person had been living in our crawl space for at least 4 months. And we knew that he set the house on fire on purpose. He used a box of matches. My mom said the first odd thing she noticed that night was the smell of sulfur. We also know who did it. It was Mark. His uncle was one of the firemen who first showed up at our house and saw him standing near our driveway watching. My mom had told him my description of what the person was wearing that I saw fleeing from our house, and it was what he was wearing. Behind our house near the crawl space area, my dad found out where he had hung out when he wasn't in the crawl space. There was a bunch of cigarette butts, cans of soda which were also found in the crawl space. But because our crawl space wasn't locked, our insurance company wouldn't have paid for the repairs. Because of our water tanks, the space was assumed to be locked, so my parents never said anything to the police and the firemen never said anything. Unfortunately, by pursuing this, we could have not had a home, a house my father had built. It took 4 months for our house to be repaired, and it smelled like ozone even years later. What bothers me the most is knowing he had seen me and my friends undressed numerous times while changing in the rec room during tons of sleepovers. Where he had set up shop was right next to the plywood with the holes drilled through. He listened to all of our secrets. I never explained to my friends that he had seen us and heard us during our sleepovers because I didn't want them to feel sick to their stomachs like I did, and still do. I still have issues when it comes to being home alone. I can't sleep if I'm the only adult in the house. I keep the volume on everything very low. I'm scared to shower. I like to be able to see the front door, and I have night terrors to this day. I'm 34 now. I've been dealing with anxiety since the fire and panic attacks since I was 18. Just recently I was diagnosed with PTSD. When the intruder was in his early 20s, he was caught for burning down a few houses and was put in jail. All of my toys were stored in that crawl space along with a lot of our family's sentimental possessions. I was recently reminded of this encounter by my mother. If she hadn't brought it up, I probably would have gone the rest of my life without thinking of this incident, but once I did, then all these memories came flooding back. My family traveled from the Midwest to the East Coast almost every year. We usually drove through Canada to New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, then up to Maine, where my dad's family is from. We stopped at various tourist spots and resorts while on the trip. When I was somewhere around 6 or 7 years old, we were staying in a family-style resort in New Hampshire. It was a very large complex with 4 buildings full of hotel rooms, all facing each other with a parking lot to the left, a small park picnicking area in the middle, and the outdoor pool with a fence around it to the right. Each building had 2 levels with outdoor stairs, and each room had a door that went outside, not into a hallway. There was a path from the bottom of the stairs to the small park to the pool. I've always been quick to get ready, so while my mom, dad, and sister, 1 year older, were getting ready to go to the pool, I was getting antsy and wanted to go and check out the tacky water slide tacked onto the side of the pool. I remember my dad being busy and distracted while I said, "I'm going out to the pool," and began walking outside and down the stairs. You could see the park and pool from our balcony, but my dad wanted me to wait. I didn't wait and proceeded to walk by myself out to the pool. I was walking along the path through the little park when 2 big arms picked me up and started pulling me back. This is what I have the sharpest memory of: my purple jelly sandals being lifted off the ground under me. I didn't immediately turn around because I just figured it was my dad dragging me back to the room, mad that I had disobeyed him. I just sighed and accepted my fate as being in trouble. Then, I heard my dad in the distance yell, "Hey, get off my daughter!" or something similar, and so I finally turned to see who the hell was holding me. It was some guy, really tall, really thin, wearing dark colors. He had a car that was pulled up right to the park, not parked in a parking spot or anything, only about 20 feet away. I looked and saw my dad barreling down the motel stairs holding my sister's water noodle and wearing his bright green neon water shorts. This was probably 1996. The dude saw my dad, dropped me, and then dove into the car, which promptly took off. I cried because I had scraped my leg in the fall. My dad chased the car for a short while, but they quickly picked up speed and were gone. I had no idea if the license plate was recorded or the cops were called. We did continue to go to the pool and play, but I remember that my dad was in a rightfully bad mood the rest of the afternoon, and I couldn't get him to play in the pool with me. He usually was a big reader, but he just sat in his chair, peering around the parking lot and looking miffed the rest of the afternoon. Who knows what would have happened if my dad had been walking out behind me or looking out the window. I was honestly probably 10 seconds away from being thrown into that car and taken God knows where. My story begins when I was 19 years old. I had just lost my job managing a store in a local mall. This particular shop wasn't steady with an influx of business, resulting in its closure. For the 3 years working there, I met many fellow managers and store owners. There was one owner in particular, Tony, that left me with an unsettling feeling every time we crossed paths. Before I lost my job, he had the daily routine of spewing inappropriate sexual remarks about my body. Eventually needing a new employer, I ventured to our mall in hopes of finding one. Tony stopped me in between filling out applications and offered a position repairing jewelry at his shop. I've had difficulty in the past dealing with awkward situations, saying no in particular. I'd often use my beating around the bush antics, this instance not being an exception. With the inability to say fuck off, it led us into an uncomfortable conversation where Tony discussed topics ranging from friends, family, and somehow eventually to drugs. I suppose Tony figured I'd dabbled in them before, as he spoke about the variety of shit he'd done back in the day. He asked, "Do you smoke weed?" I paused for a moment, considered how I would answer, but wound up blurting out, "Of course." Tony took my response as indication as it was okay to ask other personal questions. "Do you have a boyfriend?" "Yes." "Where do you live?" With my parents." He declared himself one of the more well-known pot and coke dealers in our vicinity. My facial expression had "give me a fucking break" blatantly written all over it, but this didn't stop him from babbling away. He abruptly paused mid-sentence, then spouts, "Hey, you could move in with me. I have a spare bedroom. I'd hook you up with any drug you want, no charge." "Don't you have a wife?" "Oh, the woman you've seen around is just my assistant." Yeah, okay. I noticed he and his assistant wearing matching wedding bands throughout the years. "I'm not sure how I feel about that, but I'll let you know. My ride's here." Why didn't I just say no? I left him with a glimmer of hope. Stupid. Basically sprinting through the mall, I made a quick glance behind me and realized Tony closed his shop for the day. Almost immediately after leaving, an influx of private calls came in, followed by one single text message. "It's Tony. I need to know if you plan on moving in so I can kick my roommate out." Repulsed, it dawned on me that I never gave him my number. I never filled out an application for employment either. He had absolutely no way of getting this information. I didn't respond, thinking it would be enough of a hint that I wasn't interested. After several days, Tony hadn't even crossed my mind. I foolishly swept him under the rug and moved on until some random Thursday. Knock, knock, knock. Inaudible voices. "I know what you really want, motherfucker. Lillian, get the fuck out here now." I ran as quickly as I could into our living room. My father began scowling, asking if I knew a 50-something-year-old named Tony, because he had just came looking for me. Trying to explain the situation leading up to that point, his anger towards me shifted into fear for my safety. It was apparent that Tony had followed me, likely the day he had made his offer, and now at least someone other than myself was aware of him. One early morning, I was given a ride home by my boyfriend before he headed to a job site, and while exiting his vehicle, I noticed every car parked in the driveway had their windows smashed. Every single window. Finally, we involved the police. I didn't know any information outside of where Tony worked, so officers made their way to the mall. Of course, he had conveniently taken off that day, but his assistant was available for questioning instead. Obviously, Tony's claims of being a notorious drug dealer were false, and his assistant was actually his wife. I assume he had planned to kick her out and attempted to move me in as her replacement. 6 years later, I have no solid indication that Tony was responsible for the damaged windows, although it's unlikely a coincidence. Police never arrested him due to lack of evidence. Even after what happened, I continued on my quest to find work at the mall. It wasn't long until Tony found me, but before I could mutter a single word, he screamed, "She was only my assistant." I slowly backed up, turned around, and bolted to an exit. I'm still unsure why. Of all the things he could have said, that was what he chose. My search for employment was taken elsewhere, and I have since learned how to say no. So the other day, I swiped this pretty cool dude on Tinder named Gabe. He adds me on Snapchat. We start talking a little bit. He decides to come pick me up and come smoke for a bit. I'm like, cool, yeah, whatever. In the Bay Area, smoking and driving is technically a date, But as soon as I get in the car, I get a really weird vibe. I don't know. His smile was way too wide or something, and he stared at me without blinking, just slightly long enough to make me uncomfortable. Also, he wouldn't tell me anything about himself. He just kept saying, "Oh, I make money doing this and that, whatever I can." And he would refer to all females as bitches. Major red flag. After a couple of blunts, I'm starting to get tired and I'm like, "So you want to drive me home?" And he goes, "Yeah, sure. I just gotta stop by the grocery store for a few things." And I'm like, okay, yeah. So we go to the grocery store by my house because we're still in my neighborhood. By this time it's pretty dark, but there are some lights on in the parking lot. After about 5 minutes of sitting there while he's typing on his phone, I get kind of curious and look at the reflection of the driver's side window to see if I can read his text. I could. It read, "Yeah, I got her. Sitting in Lucky's parking lot." I immediately went numb from head to toe. I decided I had to do something fast because I don't know who he's texting or why he's telling them where we are. I start to notice things like even though there's people near us, they're still kind of far away, about 25 to 30 feet, and I almost started to panic. He didn't notice anything though, so I asked, "Aren't you going to go outside?" And he goes, "Yeah, just a sec. I'm making a list of all the stuff I need." I almost shit my pants. I could obviously see the texting app still open in the reflection on the window. He was lying. I immediately grabbed my bag and bolted out of the car and started walking toward the grocery store, almost running. He was like, "Hey, what the fuck? Where the hell are you going?" And tried to grab my bag, but I had just made a direct beeline for the lighted entrance of the store. I made it into the store and looked out the window to see him driving around the parking lot, talking on the phone, waving his hands around. Seconds later, he peeled out of the parking lot and almost hit another car. I called my mom to have her come pick me up, and when I got home, he had unmatched me from Tinder and blocked me on Snapchat without saying anything. I'm not sure what your plan was, Gabe, but I'm also glad I never found out. Let's not meet ever again. And frankly, I'm probably done dating, too. I'm a supervisor of the 24/7 emergency hotline operated by a non-profit, which focuses on assisting local women within our city limits who have just experienced domestic violence within the last 72 hours and are now in emergency situations. As the supervisor, I authorize all cabs, lock changes, and place people in shelters and hotels depending on what the hotline workers determine someone might need. My two co-supervisors and I are also the only people who are authorized to meet with people outside of the organization's regular walk-in business hours. We go to the police stations, hospitals, and the like to meet with victims and provide them with temporary assistance. We, and our bosses higher up, are also the only people in the organization authorized to contact the police. If a client needs police or wants to file a report and wants us to do it, the hotline worker they're speaking to has to go through a supervisor, and we have to dispatch 911 or the local police precinct directly. Until I get dispatched, I work remotely from home because I typically work both nights and days during the same week. It allows me the opportunity to sleep at night, unless I'm called by a hotline worker or dispatched, which is necessary for the nature of the work. Because of this, I have a satellite internet phone in my apartment that can connect into a hotline worker's extension. They can use it to phone me for help when there's someone who pulls a "I need to speak to the manager" so I can connect into the call and stuff like that. I also have my cell phone available, but staff typically only use it for emergencies or when I'm out on dispatch. I've been here for about 5 years and I've never had anything too crazy happen. Sure, people are murdered. Someone was assaulted with an air conditioner unit one time. There was a lady who was 28 and had 11 kids. But outside of things that are generally depressing, there's never been anything outside of this incident that's truly rattled me. It was approximately noon on a Monday, but it was a holiday, so the office was closed except for the hotline, which works non-stop 365 days a year. I was walking home from 7-Eleven with gummy bears and a Slurpee when the hotline called my cell phone. It was Alex, a longtime worker who honestly was probably old enough to be my mom, and she sounded panicked. She straight up told me to get the fuck home ASAP and dial into her extension, that it was a legit emergency. She was going to keep the woman on the phone as long as she could. If it was anyone else other than a hotline veteran, or honestly Alex, I probably would have been like, yeah, whatever, welcome to the job, so what's going on here? But Alex is a badass boss lady with a neck tattoo who once almost got sexually assaulted, but didn't because she kicked the dude in the nuts and asked him who the hell he thought he was. Anyways, so I have never heard her sound like that before. I didn't ask any questions. I just freaked out, and I literally ran the 2 blocks home, then up the stairs to my apartment. I picked up the phone, chugged some Slurpees so I wouldn't sound horribly out of breath, and dialed in the extension Alex specified. "Hello, my name is Nicole. I'm the supervisor today. How can I help you?" I just heard static and screaming on the other end of the line. Not like any angry client with a cheap phone on the subway, but someone being tortured type of screaming, and I had no idea at first what the static was. I was so taken aback I didn't even immediately process what was going on, but I realized she was saying, "You need to help," over and over in various wordings, and the static was wind. It was not windy outside, and this lady was breathing heavily, so she was either having a panic attack or she was running. "Okay, ma'am, I'd like to help you. Where are you right now?" I said through my inner fear, which I had become a pro at hiding on the phone. I decided to also bypass the typical questions of "do you feel safe?" "what's going on today?" etc. Clearly some shit was going down, and we needed to help this lady escape whatever and get to a police station. I'm not even going to bullshit a quote because I was internally shitting myself so badly, but she said she was in Biloxi, Mississippi, running through a park she didn't know. Nothing looked familiar. She had been in the back of a work van, and she didn't know what was happening or where she was. For reference, we're in New York City, and the phone she called from was a local area code. I wasted no time conferencing in 911. Wasted no time. Alex was silent, and I kept trying to talk to the woman while the phone rang on the call, and we waited for the dispatcher. I asked her what she was wearing. She said jeans and a black shirt and a pink coat. She said her name was Lizzie and she was 23. She didn't seem lucid though, and I asked her questions about what day it was, and she was off by about a month. I asked her about landmarks, trying to figure out where she was. All she could tell me again was a park and a highway, and the last street she remembers was named after some sort of nut. Pecan, peanut, macadamia? Alex jumped in and we started listing types of nuts, and it got weird. Turns out she said it was walnut. We still had no idea where this was. We didn't know if it was NYC, Mississippi. We didn't know what was going on. She kept saying she needed us to come get her and she didn't have time. She said she was going to be murdered, but when we tried to ask her more about this, like who, what, where, with, what, she didn't respond and just kept saying she needed help. I would have sent a cab for her in a heartbeat, but I had no idea where to send it. The 911 dispatcher who answered flipped out, said she was brand new, put us on hold, and said she was going to get somebody. Cool, thanks bitch, appreciated. Alex started trying with Google Maps, trying to find the place in or around Biloxi, and I went looking around the city for it. We clearly did not find it with that limited information and in that short of a time. The 911 dispatcher finally connected and tried to speak with her. They didn't get anything either. Alex ultimately told the woman from 911 to shut the fuck up because we didn't have time for her to get up to speed, and she was asking things we already had asked and there was no time to waste. We heard one loud piercing scream, a thud that sounded oddly crunchy, and the line cut out. I sat there, Alex sat there, the 911 dispatcher sat there. It was the definition of awkward silence. Long story short, we never found out what was going on, who it was, or where they were. Alex said before I got on the line, Lizzie said she was being chased, or escaped from somewhere and thought someone was chasing her, and she was running. The 911 dispatcher said they couldn't trace the phone because we were the ones who called, so the satellite it pinged off of as originating from was my apartment, and she was definitely not my neighbor. When we connected with police, all they could tell us about the originating number was that it was a disposable phone and not registered to anyone. I have a lot of experience on the hotline, and I've learned to trust my gut about people and situations. I got bad vibes off of whatever this was, and it was in no way a fake call. Our number isn't publicly listed, so you can't Google it. You have to be referred to us by a core service agency such as Child and Family Services, Department of Health, a hospital, the police, etc. So we rarely ever get prank calls, and we've never gotten a sicko trying to fake something like this. The worst we've ever gotten since I've been here is homeless people sometimes trying to get shelter. Alex and I both swear whatever it was real, and it still doesn't sit right with either of us. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/LetsReadOfficial, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And join my Discord to interact with me and other listeners directly. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt.com. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all these stories in long compilation form and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.